Onassis Foundation.
Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Margaret Atwood?
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm alive. Where do I find you now?
You found me in Toronto.
And what has your typical day been like for the last 3 months?
My typical day
Yeah.
has been a lot of podcasts and online shows on it. So everybody who was going to do things in person is doing them online. And there has been a learning curve all over the globe, I would expect. And some of them have gone quite smoothly, and others have not. But on the whole, I would say pretty good.
It's a strange moment in that regard.
Yeah, people are getting better at it. So they're, I think at the beginning it was pretty improvised. We put online 2 events that we usually do in person, which are bird organization fundraisers. So instead of having dinners, we had a cook-it-yourself menu. And then we had all of the features that we usually have at these 2 dinners, including door prizes and the rubber chicken choir. And you can find that recorded because we recorded it at the Peely Island Bird Observatory site, which is pibo.ca. So we had a silent auction and we had some guests appearing, and we always usually have a guest author. So we had a guest author and we usually have a guest birder, and we had a guest birder, but it was all online.
Incredible. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, well, you can see the famous rubber chicken choir. We usually sing in person with our rubber chicken choir, but we did it virtually. People had their own rubber chickens in their homes.
This will be all new to me, Margaret. I'll have to listen to the rubber chicken choir. I don't think I've ever heard it.
You will see the rubber chicken choir. I am the conductor of it.
Oh gosh, I can't wait.
Yes, it's not the only rubber chicken singing event online, but this is one we've been doing for some years. And we only have one song that we sing. Usually, sometimes we add something extra, but this year we sang our standard favorite, which is Old MacDonald Had a Farm. The chickens did the chorus.
How does it go?
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay, you're pretty skilled. You knew I was trying, but I didn't succeed.
Yes, I don't have my rubber chicken at my elbow.
Oh, I wish I should have asked you, but I didn't know.
In fact, we gave away some of the rubber chickens as door prizes.
Tell me, Margaret, how much or how little of the news are you reading now?
The news?
Yeah.
I check the COVID numbers every day for my area and around the world. And it's very different in different parts. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the run-up to the U.S. election. I'm interested in environmental news, so I keep an eye on that. And we've been doing some initiatives to try to help writers who have spring books out because it's been very difficult for them.
Yeah, it's been very difficult for the writers. It's been very difficult for musicians. I I recently had
Yes,
occasion.
and it's horrible for independent bookstores. So if you have a favorite independent bookstore, you should support it now at this time.
Yeah, no, it's really, really difficult. And I hear your plea, Margaret, and I support it completely. You know, if you have a favorite bookstore, independent bookstore in your neighborhood, support it. And if you don't, support another one. They'll send you books. They
will send, yes.
They do it just as well as the monopoly does.
Yes. So there's those things that we're all keeping an eye on, and I'm doing a lot of gardening.
More than usual?
Yes, more than usual, because often at this time of year I'm gallivanting about doing live events, but not this year.
You spent much of your childhood, it would seem, in extreme isolation at insect research stations. What do you think that?
Yeah, it didn't feel that isolated, to tell you the truth, but it all depends what you're used to, as people are now discovering.
It didn't feel like that because it was your normal life back then.
That's right, exactly.
Your father,
for writers, for writers, I don't think it's been the extreme of hardship, because they spend a lot of time by themselves anyway.
That's a feeling I have doing these quarantine tapes, speaking to writers. It's life as usual in a sense, though in another sense, I think this moment may afford them some form of inspiration for their future work at times. Your father...
Maybe it's some form of inspiration to catch up on the work that they should have been doing earlier.
That's true, too. That's true, too. No excuses now, right, is what you're saying. Your father, Carl Atwood, was an entomologist.
Absolutely.
Did you learn anything about being a writer from watching him at work?
No. It's a different kind of thing, but biology is also a narrative art. So if you're studying animals, if you're studying the animal kingdom, including insects, you're studying its life cycle, especially with insects, because of course it looks quite different when it's an egg, then it's a pupa, then it's a larva. Then it's a larva, then it's a pupa, and then it's an adult. So my first novel was actually about an ant, and you could say that I learned something in reverse, because I did start with the egg, and nothing happens when you're an egg. There's no plot. Similarly, when you're a larva, nothing happens except you eat a lot. When you're a pupa, nothing happens. It's not until you get legs that there's going to be any plot. So maybe that's where the expression, this thing's got legs, came from. But there you had a novel about an ant in which nothing happened until the very end of the book. Not the best, Paul. Usually something has to happen a bit earlier.
Yeah. So in a way, you answered the question, and then you added a footnote. You answered by saying, "My father didn't."
I learned negatively something about narrative, which is don't have a book in which nothing happens for 3/4 of it. But I was only 7, so what did I know?
Now you know a little bit more, I think, and I'm
a bit more,
a little bit more. I'm curious, Margaret, if you've been thinking about what effect you imagine this pandemic might have on children.
On children,
yeah,
I think it's going to make them fairly self-reliant, or more so. And again, it depends on what age of children that we're talking about, because a 3-year-old is not the same as a 10-year-old. But I think if they've been used to their parents planning endless events for them, and those aren't happening, it's quite difficult for kids that are in school, and particularly kids who have been used to socializing at school, having a group of friends that they knew. They can't see their friends I think that part is very hard. And I think the homeschooling part has not been a walk in the park for the parents either.
No. And I think maybe, do you think parents will appreciate more what teachers do in school? And do you think in some way...
Well, they certainly ought to.
Yeah.
So I think we're all appreciating nurses more. I think we're appreciating doctors more. We're appreciating grocery store workers more, and delivery people. So services that we took for granted either aren't there, in which case we really appreciate them because they're not in our lives, or they are there, but the people doing them are running considerable risk. So I think that has caused us to think more about what we've been taking for granted and how there's a whole there are numerous people who make our society run that ordinarily we just wouldn't see. So thank goodness the trash collectors are still operating. Can you imagine if they weren't?
Well, we'll get to the things you've imagined. You've imagined quite a few things and quite a few dire things. What we're living through now, does it, in a sense, feel unprecedented? I'm particularly thinking because your parents could evoke to you the Spanish flu. So you have,
yes, they went through it.
Yeah. So you, in a way, you have memories that come through your family, and I think these things, thinking of my own family, and my father would have been 101 this year, and the stories he told me were up to the moment when he died at the age of 97 was so filled with an understanding of his early days. So I've been wondering, would my father have thought this moment was unprecedented? And I'm curious how you feel this moment now in time.
No, he would not have thought it was unprecedented because he was old enough to have experienced not only it, but the era when a lot of these infectious diseases that we now have vaccines for were uncontrolled. So he probably knew people who had tuberculosis. He may have known people who died of diphtheria, which was particularly bad for young children. I had 4 cousins who died of diphtheria. Whooping cough could kill people, scarlet fever, polio, syphilis. These things were not controlled until the wonder drugs and antibiotics came into our lives, and vaccines were developed for others. So he would certainly have experienced that, and so did I, because a lot of the stuff did not come online until the 50s.
So it, in a sense, it's déjà vu to some extent for you.
To a certain extent, but if you go back in history, there have been pandemics as far back as we know, and we can go into ancient Greek history, we can go into ancient Rome, we can go to the Black Death, otherwise known as the Great Mortality, which was probably the biggest one. Early Renaissance history killed probably half the people in Europe. Or you can go to North America and what happened in the North and South American continents after European germs arrived, because the populations here did not have any immunity to a lot of these diseases. A lot of our diseases have come from domesticated animals, and people in North and South America did not have domesticated cows. They didn't have domesticated pigs. They didn't even have domesticated chickens.
You've said that the essential question of dystopian fiction is, could it happen here? And how close are we to having actually it happen right here?
It depends what you mean by it.
I don't know what I mean.
Okay. Do you mean the end of human beings? That's not a dystopia. That's a wipeout. So a dystopia typically is an unpleasant government that you don't want to live in, which is controlling. So it's different from simply a description of anarchy or things like, last man on earth and things like that. So in stories like that, the catastrophe has taken place, but it did not result in a dystopia because it wiped out everybody except last man on earth. So you're thinking of 1984, you're thinking of Brave New World, you're thinking of Fahrenheit 451. I don't think we're there yet. I'm reading right now Evgeny Zemyatin's novel called We, which is the granddaddy of the 20th century organized dystopia, with a direct influence on 1984, for instance. And we're not there yet either. We're not that regimented. But these people put their finger on a lot of features that we've come to accept as part of everyday life. So in We, there are these giant pink ears deployed on the street. And they're listening to everything. Hello?
I didn't want to qualify dystopia because I preferred for you to. But yeah. what you're defining is not that far removed, it would seem, from reality now. I'm thinking also about...
Oh, it's pretty far removed.
You do think so?
Trust me. Yeah, it's pretty far removed. If we were in a real dystopia, you and I would not be having this conversation. Because I would probably be in a gulag, and no doubt so would you. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, you're there.
I lost you for a second.
Yes. That was because one of the giant pink ears was listening in.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think we must not edit this at all. Margaret, I think it's fantastic. Really, really. It reminds me of a moment of a conversation I had with William Gibson recently, who finds it really hard now to write science fiction.
Yes, because he says the reality is getting ahead of us.
So much so.
A lot of SF writers feel that, but of course he's had a lot of very good ideas.
Yeah, a few here and there.
Quite a few.
In November of last year, you said when people are scared and they think things are falling apart, they get more conservative and they're willing to trade civil liberties for somebody taking control.
No kidding.
Do you worry about the exploitation of this crisis by the powerful, and that it's bringing us?
People are already. Yeah, sure. People are already trying that. Not so much in the United States, but not for want of the will. It's just they seem to be quite inept. And the United States has going for it the fact that it's not uniform. So it does not have a uniform population that can easily be co-opted into agreeing on almost anything. You name it, there's going to be people who disagree with it. So that could make for a rowdy and contentious society, but it's probably also going to make for one that it's hard to regiment.
Do you, Margaret, do you still collect con artist stories?
Do I collect what?
Con artist stories?
Oh, stories about confidence men and women. Fraudsters, tricksters, scammers.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. And also art fakery. I think my favorite piece of art fakery was a man who invented an entire Mesoamerican civilization, which never existed, and he made all the pottery objects for it. and then he sold the collection to a museum.
How fantastic! Are you also interested in magic?
I'm interested in magicians. You mean how they perform their tricks?
Yeah, and also magicians as I think sleight of hand is so interesting to think about in the present political context.
Yes, I think we're more in the con artist, scam artist
Right.
region, but this has been a motif in American literature for a long time. So it's Herman Melville, I think, has got a story called The Confidence Man.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing about America was that you could turn up and say you were, say, the Grand Duchess Anastasia, and there would always be a certain number of people who would believe you because you were from somewhere else and they didn't have a way of checking up on your story. So that's why Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn has these two characters who are obvious scammers who claim to be the Duke and the King and the Duke. And they're able to get people to believe that because in those days there was really no way of checking. Now, of course, we have the internet and we have investigative reporters and we have following up on backstories, and it's harder to pull something like that off. But once you're in that region, you're also in the area of spies and double agents and cover stories. So all of those things are connected. They're people who are purporting to be something they are not.
No kidding.
And it goes all the way from, fake cures for COVID to false identities.
I had such pleasure recently speaking with Lewis Hyde, who who's so excellent on such topics, on so many topics. But he's been very interested.
So he was talking about tricksters.
He's very interested in tricksters.
Yes, well, tricksters as gods do things for the heck of it, but tricksters as people do things for fun and profit.
If we were not in a lockdown mode, I might have had the pleasure, if you were to be there, to be witnessing the next Future Library recipient.
Oh yes. So is that now? That's going to be?
I think it's Karl Ove Knausgaard, but I might be wrong.
Yes, he's going to be the next one. But who's handing over this year?
I'm forgetting now. But could you describe that project, which I think is so interesting, and perhaps so interesting at this particular moment because it's as you've said, a hopeful gesture.
Very hopeful. All right. So some 6 or 7 years ago, I got a letter from the committee who had put this thing together. And it is the brainchild of a Scottish conceptual artist called Katie Patterson. And she somehow at a slow time convention, because she's interested in slow time, met up with a person called Anne Marie from Norway, who was associated with the library that they were about to build in Oslo. So Katie and Anne Marie and various other people cooked up this project, which is a slow time project. And it is called the Future Library of Norway. And it involves how many trees? A forest of trees being planted near Oslo, which will grow for 100 years.
Amazing.
And in each year of that 100 years, a different writer from around the world will create a manuscript And when I say manuscript, I mean it can be anything made of words. So it can be one word, it can be a novel, it can be a screenplay, a diary, a letter, a play, a short story, an essay, anything made out of words, no pictures. And this manuscript will exist in only 2 copies, and nobody shall be told what is in it. And you will take the manuscript over to Oslo, and you'll walk into the forest that is growing, and you'll hand over the 2 copies of the manuscript after the chief librarian has made a speech, the forester has made a speech, the mayor has made a speech, Katie Patterson has made a speech, and you have made a speech. This little ceremony in the forest where typically it rains. And then these 2 copies of the manuscript will disappear. They will now disappear into the future Library of Norway, which has been built. You can actually go into this room, and you can see the names of the authors lit up in a beautiful wall, and behind that wall are the manuscripts, I assume. So when 100 years has passed, all of the manuscripts will be opened up and will be printed on the paper that will be made from the trees that will have grown in the forest that was planted 100 years before. And that is the Future Library of Norway project. So they did say they would like manuscripts that had something to do with time and something to do with words. Those are the only hints. And I was indeed the first one. I added something to their list of requirements. I said, archival paper. Because if they don't use archival paper, the things may be opened up and there will be nothing but crumbles.
It's so extraordinary a project.
So isn't that hopeful?
It's so
very hopeful.
Yeah, it reminds me of a line I think we spoke about once together of W.S. Merwin, that on the last day of the world I would want to plant a tree.
Yes, exactly.
It's so
so
beautiful.
it is like that, and
so beautiful.
So it means that you're hoping the trees will grow. There will be a library. People will still know how to read. People will still be interested in reading, and the human race will still exist on the planet.
You're writing really for a future reader.
Well, that is the idea, but of course you can't really do that because you don't know what those people are going to be like. But it's an old trope of science fiction. And we find it even in We, because the narrator of We is intending to put his manuscript into a rocket that will be shot out into the universe. And he's writing it for some distant planet or population and has no idea whether or not those creatures exist at all. So what Orwell says about it is, who am I writing for? He's writing for people in the future. Either the people in the future will be the same as today, in which case they won't be able to read it, or they will be different, in which case they won't be able to understand it.
Margaret, what a pleasure it's been to talk to you, and I knew what would happen has happened, which was all too brief. But I really love talking to you, and for the moment I send you a virtual hug, and I hope someday.
Well, thank you, and one for you, and I'm sure that that there will be a vaccine, and there will be an easily available test, and once those things happen, we will be out of the proverbial woods.
As we were talking about woods just a moment ago. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Margaret, and take good care, stay safe, and I hope our paths cross soon.
I'm sure that will happen. Bye. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Margaret.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, Go to dublab.com/support